Ladies and gentlemen, kindly take your seats. We'd like to commence the program in the next 2 minutes. Kindly take your seats. We'd like to commence the program in the next 2 minutes.
Growth is not dictated, it is cultivated. It thrives in brave decisions, shared opportunities, and the ambition to create. Inclusive growth happens when businesses build, not just for profit, but for people. It echoes in the hum of industries, the quiet determination of small traders, in the digital highways linking small enterprises to global markets, and in the tenacity of the soil that must adapt to the seasons. Prosperity is not owned, it is shared. It is multiplied in the exchange of ideas in economies that lift as they rise. This is Africa's moment, not to arrive, but to lead. Shared prosperity is knowledge passed on, opportunities unlocked, and futures shaped. Because access creates possibility, and possibility fuels progress. When businesses thrive, societies flourish, and the once impossible becomes inevitable. The world moves forward when it moves together. No nation, no industry, no enterprise prospers in isolation. Africa does not stand in the gap, it builds the bridge. Global cooperation is not charity, not obligation, but a revolution of responsibility. It is the engine driving sustainable futures where businesses, nations, and people move as one. Inclusive growth and shared prosperity through global cooperation, led from Africa, shared with the world.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to welcome you all as distinguished guests to what promises to be a momentous occasion on the South African calendar. To our distinguished guests, I'd like to take a moment of actually honoring and, of course, acknowledging key members who are present with us here today. The representatives of the Ministry of International Relations, and of course the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Minister Ronald Lamola, who will be joining us later today. Our G20 Sherpa, Mr. Cas Kuvadia, representatives of the G20 presidency, distinguished leaders and delegates from the B20 South Africa, B20 stakeholders and members of the media, not forgetting our key sponsors and partners who have made today possible. It's a real privilege to see so many of you as key captains of industry, individuals who shape South Africa's economy, influence the global conversations that we actively participate in, joining us here today. My name is Gugulethu Mfuphi, and it's a privilege to see so many of you who have gathered here in the room to mark a particular day in today's calendar. I want to highlight that this is not just a conclusion of an event. It's a culmination of ongoing engagements and conversations that have taken place between key leaders within the business fraternity. Under the leadership of BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, the B20 has gathered multiple stakeholders, experts, business leaders, and individuals with a key passion to propel the growth and development that we prioritize in our economies to engage. Robust conversations, deep insight, and most importantly, critical outcomes that today will be shared as we officially mark the handover of the B20 policy recommendations to the G20. Now, I must tell you, this is an occasion that I'm excited to actually witness, because as we continue to engage in South Africa's global leadership, we fully unpack and underscore the level of unity, integrity, robust governance, and positioning to ensure that we're active participants within the global community too. So today we'll hear and get reflections from several of the task force leaders. The chairs will give us their perspective on the level of engagement, the outcomes that have come through, and most importantly, detail into the recommendations that have been shared by the task force leaders. Today, we want to invite you to engage, to network, and most importantly, to open yourself up to the conversations that will be had, and understand and reflect whilst we continue to make our way to November, to build up on the opportunity that has been presented for us to underscore our capacity to be global leaders who are locally relevant but internationally competitive. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start off with our program, but before we do, a brief overview of the House rules. We're running quite a tight ship, so we will ensure that we keep to time for the program. I'm well aware that all of you in the room play a critical role in running our economy. So you will have phone calls to answer to, you will have some emails to get to, and of course peers and colleagues to reach out to. But as you do so, we kindly request that you keep your cell phones on silent to minimize any disruption that might occur for the speakers on stage and for your peers and colleagues who are joining us here in the room. Restrooms are located outside towards my right-hand side. There is necessary signage available to lead you to the right avenue. We are not anticipating an emergency drill today. So if you hear an alarm, don't run, but please do follow through with the necessary emergency signs that will be present. We also call for your active participation and engagement across the room, as many of you do engage. Before we get started, I do think it's important for me to note that this is probably a moment where I feel like a kid in a candy store. So often I have the opportunity to speak to several of you on company results, business strategy, policy direction and frameworks, the impact and influence of capital markets, industry dynamics from various sectors across South Africa's economy, and I'm excited to see that not only have you gathered as key participants post the pandemic to unite and share a structured voice as to how we take the country and the globe forward, but also seeing the energy and the robustness that so many of you have carried. So thank you for making time. Thank you for being key participants. And most importantly, thank you for taking the lead and chairing these key conversations that translate into policy that ultimately will lead to actionable items. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please let's get ready. And when I say warmly, I mean warmly. I'm aware that many of you are very familiar with each other here in the room, and of course acknowledge and respect the outcomes that all of you do share and play within your respective sectors. But please let's warmly start off today's conversation, setting the tone, welcoming us all, and highlighting the key outcomes that we look to focus on today, given the handing over of the B20 recommendations, the G20 Sherpa, Mr. Cas Kuvadia.
Thank you very much. This is going to be a great few hours, actually, and I'm certainly looking forward to it, and I hope you do too, and that we don't disappoint you. In his absence, good morning to the Minister. He did indicate that he had some other commitments and he will be a bit late, but he will be here before his address on the program. To G20 leaders and G20 participants who are here, and to the B20 delegates. We are here as business leaders. We've invited the media, and we'll have media interviews later. And the whole purpose is to today hand over the B20 recommendations to the G20, and Minister Lamola is receiving those recommendations on behalf of the G20, and then to make those recommendations available to the public so that the public knows exactly what we've been doing and where we've come out. The B20 task forces led by who have done an amazing job. The chairs and deputy chairs and co-chairs have done a phenomenal job, have put in a lot of time, have put in a lot of effort. And I must say, I was humbled that when we approached all of you. It was a 2-minute conversation with people. There was no hesitation in saying, yes, of course, we will do this, and thank you very much. So under the sterling leadership of the chairs and over 1,000 C-suite people, business people, from the G20 countries and from other parts of this continent, they have today, we will today be presenting to the G20 30 transformative and evidence-based recommendations. And I want to stress that. There's been a phenomenal amount of work, a phenomenal amount of research, phenomenal amount of experience from the various G20 countries that have gone into these recommendations. And we truly believe that if implemented, they can be transformative. And the implementation is a critical issue. And we will, in the next 2 months, advocate and lobby for the acceptance of these recommendations, but also for their implementation. And if we implement them, and particularly the G20 countries and multilateral institutions that usually do these things, implement them, we will bridge gaps and unlock human promise across this continent. And we have deliberately put Africa at the center of the B20 agenda. Not because we believe in the growth and development of the continent, which we do, but the success of the African continent is a success for the globe. And if the African continent fails, then the world is actually shooting itself in the feet, because the African continent has resources, capacity, minerals that can make a significant difference to what are the challenges and priorities of this globe. So we stand at Africa's global moment. Our region boasts some of the world's fastest growing economies, a demographic dividend with youth constituting the majority of our population, and we need to ensure that it is a demographic dividend and not a demographic problem. And the raw materials to power a green and industrial revolution. But we also face urgent challenges: climate shocks threatening harvests and livelihoods, infrastructure deficits hampering trade, digital divides that exclude millions from tomorrow's jobs. These recommendations are our contribution as the B20 to the answer to that dual reality of promise and peril. And we've got to concentrate on the promise, and we believe we can. Essentially, you'll hear a lot about the task forces and so on from the two panels, but we have come out with 5 strategic themes, and then 3 key enablers, because we can come out with all the themes we like. If we don't have enablers to actually achieve what we're talking about, we're not making much of a difference. So the recommendations we bring forward are not isolated proposals. They are woven around these 5 themes that reflect our collective moment of truth, and 3 enablers that make them possible. The first pillar tackles the finance gap that stalls critical infrastructure and industrial projects on the continent, in other countries in the South and elsewhere. By blending private and public capital, lowering the cost of finance, and opening access to small and women-led businesses, we can create truly bankable projects. And the task force led by Sam Shabalala talks to a number of those and other recommendations. Second, we must secure food and agriculture with a coordinated approach through climate-smart farming, strengthened regional supply chains and market opportunities for smallholder farmers. We can transform agriculture from subsistence to a growth engine. Thirdly, climate change affects people daily. I mean, climate change is a reality. And the impacts of climate change we see all the time. Scaling adaptation financing, accelerating renewable energy, and equipping people for green jobs is how we guard livelihoods and the planet. The fourth overall theme recognizes that the digitalization drives economies and livelihoods. It's not something that's coming, it's something that's here, and it's the future. Africa has a youthful population that must be skilled and a workforce that must be reskilled to drive the digital economy. By investing in coding boot camps, micro-credential platforms, and digital vouchers for SMEs, we lay the foundation for a digitally literal workforce and enterprises that create jobs. This is how we turn a youthful population into a talent powerhouse. Finally, there is an opportunity to catalyze the continent's industrialization. This is a task force we added in South Africa. Brazil did not have this task force. And we felt that industrialization is critical to the country and to the continent. We need to move from being exporters of raw materials and minerals to exporters of finished goods and processed goods. So industrialization through critical minerals is an opportunity to catalyze the continent's industrialization process. Africa sits on a treasure trove of strategic minerals essential for batteries, renewable energy, and high-tech manufacturing, all needed by the rest of the world. For Africa's business community, this is critical. We face a defining choice: remain a supplier of raw materials or build industries and value chains that secure our place in the global economy for generations to come. So these are the 5 overall themes. And the task force chairs will go through those in the panels, and we'll go into detail in how each of the task forces talks to this. But none of this is possible without the right enablers. We call for transparent public-private partnerships to mobilize capital and deliver services. The empowerment of women and small business remains crucial as the backbone of most of our economies. And we took a decision early on in this process that women empowerment and SME development will run through each of our task forces. So each of our task forces, in the areas that they were deliberating on, has factored in deliberation on how to empower women in those areas, how to enable SMEs in those areas. So we brought women empowerment and SME development into the center of the deliberations. We must build greater resilience against pandemics, climate shocks, and some man-made stuff like corruption, so that our collective progress is not undone by the next crisis, and we can weather those crises. A resilient private sector preserves jobs, sustains supply chains, and underpins community stability when adversity strikes. And we showed that as a private sector during the pandemic. We came together as the totality of the private sector, as we have done in the partnership we have with the President through B4SA. And I see Martin is here, led by Martin. So we can do this, and we must continue to do this. These are global imperatives, And with the support of the G20, they can be the foundation of shared growth and lasting prosperity, not just for Africa, but for the globe. So where to from here? B20 South Africa will spend the next 2 months focusing on advocating for, promoting, and lobbying for these recommendations to be accepted by the G20 and to be implemented. We will also engage the previous B20 hosts and future hosts to try to look at some sort of mechanism to track the implementations of these recommendations and to measure their impact. Because B20 is about business. Business wants to see impact. We don't want policy talk shops that get nowhere. And this hasn't been tried yet in the B20. We're going to try this to see if we can, together with previous hosts and future hosts, establish some sort of mechanism to track and to also measure impact. To the global business community gathered here and tuning in worldwide, because some of our global partners are tuning in, your advocacy matters now more than ever. We invite you to pilot financing models for these recommendations by next year. Business can actually pilot these things and show that they work. We don't have to wait necessarily for G20 governments. To share granular data on project outcomes and to launch demonstration sites that prove our concepts at scale. Imagine the impact of mobilizing even a fraction of global capital towards these initiatives. If not now, then when do we do that? At the time when the globe is in crisis. Over the coming weeks, we will engage G20 governments, our government and others. We will mobilize our local business advisory council to engage our government. We'll mobilize the International Business Advisory Caucus that we put together to lobby other governments and with the help of the Secretariat. We will engage G20 governments, multilateral institutions, and business networks to secure endorsements and support for long-term implementation and tracking. Our goal is to ensure that these recommendations don't gather dust, but catalyze action from New York to New Delhi, from Beijing to Nairobi to Johannesburg and beyond. In closing, allow me to leave you with the saying, alone we race, together we blaze new trails. And that's what we want to do, and that's what we hope one of the critical legacies of the B20 will be. Today I invite you to blaze new trails with us. This is Africa's B20. We invite the world to engage with these recommendations, collaborate, and join us in leading the change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovadia. Appreciate the outcomes, and of course, as you've set the challenge to all of us, not only here in the room, but even those also joining us from across the globe, it's time to set a trail. Set a trail, a new blaze, right? Blaze a new trail in terms of the outcomes and the feedback that we're looking to ensure that we participate in. But I can imagine that many of you must be excited, but also curious. We understand that the task force chairs have been in robust sessions, engaging with their co-chairs, listening to industry leaders, and of course, trying to fully understand and unpack what these solutions do need to entail in order to chart a new trajectory ahead. So that we don't just imagine what the outcomes could be should these policies be implemented, but that we do have factual and tangible outcomes and case studies that can be developed to ensure that this will drive the necessary success we look for. Well, we're going to get a quick overview of that, getting some insight into a quick highlight of the recommendations that have been made by the 8 task force chairs, and of course, the various participants who've collaborated with them, and also understanding how this does play a role within the 30 recommendations that will be shared and handed over to the G20. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you pay careful attention, listen intently, keep a curious mind, and most importantly, be open to what will be shared. We will have a panel discussion later to deep dive into some of these recommendations, but for now, to set the lay of the landscape, to give you a better understanding of what it is that we're talking about and what solutions and levers we're pulling at, please cast your attention to the screens. For those of you online, pay attention to the screen that you're viewing, because over the next 10 or so minutes, we'll be able to hear from the respective task force chairs sharing some of the key and critical outcomes that they will be presenting. So, If we may, let's cast our attention to the screens to get more insight.
Hello, welcome to B20 South Africa. My name is Kes Kuvadia, and I have the honor of serving as the B20 Sherpa. B20 South Africa brought together voices from across the global business community in 8 task forces, each composed of business leaders, entrepreneurs, academics, and civil society experts. Since the beginning of the year, these change makers have been united by a shared commitment to inclusive and sustainable growth. This moment is historic as we prepare for the first ever African-led G20 summit. We carry a deep responsibility to ensure that Africa's voice is not only heard, but heeded as the world sets its economic priorities. Business has a vital role to play. We know that progress is built not in isolation, but through collaboration, by working together across borders, sectors, and perspectives. The mission of each task force was clear: to craft bold, practical, and business-driven policy recommendations that will be presented to the G20. Let us begin with a task force that speaks to the very foundation of economic resilience: employment and education. Chaired by Paul Henratty, CEO of Sanlam, this group is tracking the urgent challenge of preparing our societies for the future of work, ensuring that opportunity, dignity, and skills are within reach of all.
The Employment and Education Task Force developed recommendations that reflect the perspectives of the global business community, aimed at strengthening labour markets, expanding access to skills and education, and advancing inclusive economic growth across the G20. We focused on 6 key thematic areas: promoting a business-led agenda for job creation and labour market participation, increasing female labour force participation, advancing a flexible approach to platform work and the gig economy, equipping citizens early on through early childhood education, connecting youth to earning opportunities, and empowering lifelong demand-led skilling.
Our next task force covered the critical areas of trade and investment. Let us hear now from our chair, Busi Mabuza.
Across the world, businesses are operating in a time of rising trade uncertainty, fragmented value chains, and growing environmental pressures. Our task force focused on advocating for open markets in general and the acceleration of the African Continental Free Trade Area in particular. We also aimed to foster stability in global trade, revive multilateralism, and promote the development of a climate-responsive trade architecture. A key objective was developing initiatives to empower small and medium-sized enterprises by improving their access to financing, international markets, and value chains.
Our third B20 task force, chaired by Nedbank chairperson Daniel Minele, addresses one of the most urgent challenges of our time: driving a just, sustainable, and inclusive energy transition.
As the Energy Mix and Just Transition Task Force, we delivered actionable recommendations based on 4 key thematic areas. These included finding a balance between sustainability and energy security, effectively mobilizing sustainable energy transition finance, accelerating industrialization across the energy value chain, and expanding and modernizing energy infrastructure. At the heart of our work is the belief that energy security, economic competitiveness, and environmental responsibility must be pursued together and not in isolation.
The fourth of our 8 B20 South Africa task forces is focused on one of the most powerful levers of change: digital transformation. From connectivity and innovation to data governance and digital inclusion, their work is shaping the policies that will define how technology serves people, businesses, and societies in the years ahead. This task force is led by Phuthi Maganyele Dabengwa, Executive Director of Naspers Limited, a respected voice in Africa's digital economy.
In an increasingly connected world, digital technologies can be a powerful driver of inclusive growth. Our recommendations as a Digital Transformation Task Force covered 4 key thematic areas: expanding tech access for economic growth, addressing the digital skills gap and digital literacy, ensuring access to high-quality, modern, affordable, and reliable internet, and establishing a way forward around AI ethics and regulation.
While financial systems remain a cornerstone of global progress, the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force placed economic inclusion at the heart of its agenda, recognizing that prosperity must be both shared and sustainable. The task force was led by Sim Shabalala, CEO of the Standard Bank Group.
Our overarching objective as the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force was to identify actionable recommendations that can be taken forward by the G20 and other key stakeholders to help close the global infrastructure gap. Our recommendations were shaped by the following themes: unlocking long-term investment, increasing the availability and efficiency of public and private investment, supporting the expansion of investable infrastructure projects, ensuring that infrastructure investments are sustainable, and reducing the cost of capital through partnerships with development finance institutions and other multilateral institutions.
No economy can thrive without trust, and trust begins with responsible business conduct. That is why the Integrity and Compliance Task Force, led by Rueda Redfern, CEO of Deloitte Africa, has taken on the critical challenge of combating corruption and strengthening ethical standards across sectors.
Corruption can undermine public trust, stifle growth, distort markets, and deter investment. The Integrity and Compliance Task Force focused on developing actionable proposals to help strengthen compliance systems, expand cross-border cooperation, and harness technology to detect and prevent misconduct. The recommendations were shaped by 3 key themes: leveraging technology in integrity and anti-corruption measures, strengthening integrity embedment in climate and sustainability finance systems, and amplifying collective action and integrity standards for inclusive growth.
The 7th of our 8 B20 South Africa task forces turns its attention to one of the most urgent and universal challenges of our time: building sustainable food systems and advancing agricultural resilience. With over 8.2 billion people sharing this planet, ensuring access to safe, nutritious and affordable food is not just a moral imperative, it is a strategic necessity for global stability and development. Leading this vital conversation is Task Force Chair Deborah Malowa, Head of Africa at Bayer.
Agriculture fuels economies, from first light in the fields to busy market stalls to the meals that bring us together. But today, it is under pressure from climate shocks, volatile prices, and fragile supply chains. Our work in the Sustainable Food Systems and Agriculture Task Force is about building inclusive, future-ready food systems through innovation, investment, and cross-border cooperation. Our recommendations to the G20 are clear: strengthen the resilience of agri-food supply chains, enhance access to productivity inputs and technologies, promote inclusive and equitable livelihoods, integrate intra- and inter-regional trade into broader strategies for food security, and accelerate the adoption of resilient and adapted agricultural innovations in food value chains.
Finally, we arrive at the 8th B20 South Africa Task Force, focused on industrial transformation and innovation. Chaired by Andrew Kirby, CEO of Toyota South Africa, this task force tackled one of the defining questions of our era. How can industry evolve to meet the demands of a rapidly changing world?
Manufacturing powers economies, creating jobs, building skills, and driving growth. Yet too many industries remain in low-value production, held back by fragmented value chains and slow adoption of new technologies. The Industrial Transformation and Innovation Task Force is focused on changing that through tech-led growth, stronger value chains, and sustainable future-ready manufacturing. Our recommendations to the G20 are clear. Co-create industrial strategies with business to align plans with real market needs. Strengthen value chains and open inclusive pathways into industrial jobs. And accelerate the adoption of sustainable, advanced manufacturing with the right incentives and delivery models.
These are the 8 B20 South Africa task forces, each one tackling a critical pillar of global economic progress. Their recommendations reflect months of collaboration and expertise, and they open the door to conversations that shape meaningful change. We are proud to share this work with you. But more than that, we are eager to engage, because this is not just a presentation, it is a dialogue, and it is one that matters. We stand at a pivotal crossroad. We have the opportunity to shape a more inclusive, resilient, and forward-looking global business landscape, one that serves not only markets, but the communities we live in and the people we represent. Let us seize this moment with purpose and unity.
I think we let you defrost for a while and the energy can definitely build up. True to African and South African culture, perhaps that's our bomb squad, as I joked and alluded to Cass earlier on. The chairs who have actively participated in robust conversations, and as we've heard, just giving us a slight snippet and insight into the recommendations that are made. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that deserves another round of applause. Well, as has been mentioned, it's not just about a handover of recommendations and suggestions. This really does unlock the opportunity for dialogue, robust conversations, for us to hear not only what the reflections of the task force chairs have been in journeying together these recommendations, but also understanding how we can implement them within the global context of the recommendations that will be shared with the G20. So over the next 20 to 40 minutes, we're going to have an opportunity to participate in 2 robust conversations with the chairs themselves. They'll be joining me on stage shortly to help us unpack some of the key insights, reflections that they've also participated in, and key takeaways that you and I need to walk away with. Do be mindful that we are limited in terms of time, so we won't be able to get into the detail and much of the nuances that will be shared in the recommendations. However, as has been mentioned, it will be publicly available, and there will be an opportunity as well for engagement as key stakeholders, members of the media, and our global peers and counterparts. I'm quite keen and eager and excited, and I think you should all be too, because this is where we're going to get into the conversations with the chairs. I'm going to introduce our first panel. They will join me up on stage. I'll introduce them individually regarding the task force that they are chairing. Given the fact that we are excited to see them and actively participate in conversation, I ask that you allow me to welcome all of the speakers up on stage, following which, when they take a seat, we'll have a resounding round of applause for all of them as they make their way up. Taking the first seat to my left-hand side in the beige chair, I'd like to warmly welcome Andrew Kirby, the chair for B20 South Africa Industrial Transformation and Innovation Task Force. He will be followed by Busi Mabuza, chair of the B20 South Africa Trade and Investment Task Force, followed by Daniel Manele, chair of the B20 South Africa Energy Mix and Just Transition Task Force, and followed by Deborah Maloa, chair of the B20 South Africa Sustainable Food Systems and Agricultural Task Force. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them all a warm round of applause. Thank you so much to the chairs and, of course, yourselves for actively participating and sharing in some of the energy. And I really think that this is a momentous occasion for all of us to acknowledge. It's been months of hard work, robust conversations, as has been mentioned, and most importantly, gathering various leaders of institutions, businesses, companies, and industries that have shaped not only South Africa's economy, but the global economy. I can imagine that it must not only have been tough, but for many of you, exhausting. So I'm hoping that this is not just a brief sigh of relief, but also an opportunity just for us to reflect on the journey in your individual capacities very briefly before we get into the outcomes on what this experience has been like with peers, counterparts, industry professionals, where you all gather together and have to seek some level of alignment. Andrew, maybe let's start off with you. Is this your woosah moment, perhaps?
No, I think it's been a remarkable journey, and I think maybe just to give some background, I think one of the insights that we found was that the industrialization discussion has often been underestimated in global discussions, and often there's a view that technology and services are the key drivers of growth. But we know through the evidence and through our research that almost all the countries that delivered high levels of GDP growth consistently over many years did so through a manufacturing or industrialization focused strategy.
100%.
So, there's a very strong link between manufacturing value addition, which is a proxy for industrialization, and strong economic growth. And we found that is a discussion that hadn't really been raised to the right levels. I think if we just think about Africa, our GDP growth per capita over the last 25 years has only been 1.1%.
Yeah.
China's been 8%, India's been 5%. And for South Africa, our GDP, our manufacturing as a percentage of GDP has dropped from 19% to just 12.8% last year.
Yeah.
So a significant decline in industrial output. And at the same time, of course, we heard from Cass that there's been a tremendous amount of global disruption. We're seeing stalled in capital investment in industrialization. So this is a really important time to be having this discussion. In fact, low and middle income countries have dropped their industrial level by 10% over the last 5 years. So quite important, but we're in a very fortunate situation. There's a significant technology shift. We're seeing the advent of Industry 4.0, digitalization, AI, robotics, but the more important part is it's becoming a lot more accessible.
Yeah.
So emerging markets are now able to essentially leapfrog where we had significant barriers in the past. So industrial strategy is really becoming an imperative. It's really key that we raise awareness around industrialization. I'm very pleased that it's become a core topic for this B20 task force.
100%. I can imagine, though, that this is obviously not done in isolation, right? Engaging with several peers, journeying on making sure that you also take into account some of the areas that might overlap, right? Whether it does speak to energy, making sure that from a skills point of view, there is alignment that does ensure that your policy recommendations regarding industrialization do also speak to a level of sustainability, taking into account some of the other concepts you need to consider.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We had over 110 members spread over Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas. Good gender balance. We had representation from all the different industries, so it was a real privilege to be part of that. But we also needed to think about the fact that countries in the G20 all have very different contexts. Some are what we refer to as foundational, where they're just starting the journey to establish a strong industrial base. Others are accelerating, wanting to transition to green, sustainable technology. And others are well established with very strong levels of industrialization and looking to take a step into a lot more complex and deeper value manufacturing. So we needed to make sure that our policy recommendations covered all of those different contexts.
100%. Mambusi, I'm keen to hear your thoughts and your perspective, especially within the task force that you take care of regarding, of course, driving trade as well as investment as a task force. Ever-changing world, evolving perspectives, many aspects to consider as well. What have the last few months been like for you chairing this particular task force with the respective leaders you participate with?
We were very fortunate to have very strong support from the PMO and the B20 Secretariat. In our case, the Trade and Investment Task Force had a fantastic knowledge partner, and I think I can name them as BCG. We I'm not competing with Andrew here, had over 200 members.
Oh, I see that.
More than 50% female, representing 41 countries. We had a very strong bench from the African continent. We drew our co-chairs from a number of leading companies globally and from within the African continent. And I was most delighted that the PMO could assist us ensure that the voice of small, medium, micro enterprises was present, but they were not just present, they were very vocal. So I'm very proud. The discussions were heated because we were dealing with trade and investment issues. Fortunately, two of our co-chairs were actually co-chairs in the prior B20 chairships. And so that ensured a level of continuity. If you look at our first recommendation, for example, which calls for the promotion of a stable trade and investment environment, that talks directly to one of the recommendations from the Brazil B20 chairship, where they called for the strengthening of the trade and investment governance. And most exciting for me is our call for a new trade and investment deal for Africa.
Yes.
Many of the G20 nations have agreements, compacts with the African continent, and we believe that there is an opportunity to, in collaboration with the AFCFTA Secretariat, consolidate these and ensure that investment is attracted into the continent in a manner that helps accelerate the African continental free trade area. And of course, lastly, we could not ignore the increasingly devastating climate events that all nations are seeing. These are just not limited to the developing countries. So business called for a climate responsive trading environment. And this, of course, echoes some of the calls that were made previously.
100%. It ties into, again, many of the themes that have been highlighted by some of your peers, but of course some significant voices and conversations that have taken place here. Of course, you can't necessarily drive industrialization and innovation, prioritizing ongoing trade without participating in a just transition. And this is, of course, where we do take a look at significant levels of investment that do need to drive energy. And of course, policy recommendations, I can imagine from your perspective, Mr. Manelli, you serve wearing multiple hats, but of course I can imagine gathering many more voices. Do your numbers firstly outdo Mambusi's with regard to the consultants you had on board? And then secondly, talk us through some of the highlights and reflections.
It is obviously not always as we know about quantity.
Sure. Quality.
Which is a precursor, obviously, to tell you that our task team was not, task force was not quite as large as the last two. We had about 150 members in our task team. But Gugu, just to echo the sentiments of colleagues here, it was quite a privilege to be part of this process. It was rewarding, it was enriching, it was busy. But I would reflect on sort of three issues that I think were sort of defining features of the work up until now. I think the first one would be the rebalancing of the conversation. Cass spoke to the issue that right from the outset, there was a very clear determination to leverage the fact that this was the first time since the elevation of the G20 to leaders level that it was being hosted by an African country on the African continent. So the issue was to make sure that emerging markets were heard and were not, as we have seen previously, just recipients of global policies, but were actually in the conversation, were co-creators of the proposal that we've seen. So I think that was achieved. We managed to amplify Africa's voice, and in terms of the priorities as it relates to finance, to energy, to resilience. And so, and also from a perspective of not only, of course we can't deny them, but not only pointing out to the challenges that we face, but clearly also outlining the opportunities that exist and that Africa needs to be taken as seriously as an equal partner. And this has been referred to previously. If you just think about the amount of critical minerals, to 70% that we hold as African emerging economies overall, great opportunity to advance the conversation and rebalance it to say we need to move from extraction to value creation and create jobs and fuel growth. So I think that would have been as the first area I would highlight. The second one for me, which was quite a defining feature, was around collaboration and business leadership. And as you know, in the world that we find ourselves of sort of increased geopolitical and geoeconomic fragmentation, collaboration is a rare commodity. But so the spirit of collaboration that I saw certainly in our task force, and as you've heard, the co-chairs were very senior business leaders from across the B20, G20 community. The dedication, the amount of time that people gave engaging bilaterally with our knowledge partners, submitting written inputs into shaping our recommendations and policy actions that we put through. That was a very defining feature, that, accepting that what we're dealing with here are global systemic challenges that require that level of collaboration.
100%.
So that was
I'm just cognizant
great.
of time, and I want to make sure that I bring Deborah in to ensure that we have enough time to actually get through many of the themes and reflect on them again. As you've mentioned, collaboration certainly stood out for Daniel, and I'm keen to understand, Deborah, what stood out for you? Because as mentioned, that collaboration was reflected not so long ago during the pandemic, when again, members of the business fraternity came together to solve for the issues that we have. And for business, for governments, for any society at large, we all know that one of our biggest contributors and most important resources is our people. It was highlighted as well in an earlier message from Cass. And I'm quite keen to understand, when it comes to food security and the agricultural task force, what key priorities were considered in aligning with many of the themes that are brought through in the recommendations today?
Yeah, the Food Systems and Agriculture Task Force, we have had a busy year, and a really good and busy year. Our knowledge partner, McKinsey, in the room, were incredible. My co-chairs, some of them in the room today, were incredible. And we quickly realized that we were representing farmers and the value chain that pretty much employs over 64% of the continent. So quite frankly, we were probably representing the biggest private sector task force, private sector on the continent. Gotcha. And these are our farmers. It was an inclusive task force across continents, Africa, Asia, Americas, Europe. So we were totally inclusive. We also had gender parity, and we came from multiple sectors. We were not just agribusiness, it was manufacturing, it was civil society, it was academia, it was experts. And this was important because it was bringing pragmatism into the room. Mm-hmm. Some priorities emerged. Resilience, in order to drive resilience in our food systems, it was integral to make sure that we withstand climate shocks, economic shocks, and supply chain volatility. When it comes to inclusivity, exactly what Cass said, you cannot have a conversation about agriculture and food systems without bringing the SMEs, women, and youth into the conversation. And when it comes to sustainability, we need to feed more. Africa's population, for example, will double by 2050. So we need to feed more with less. So sustainable and climate-smart agriculture became critical. In terms of interconnectivity, we recognize that trade is not just an economic driver, but actually a tool of resilience. If, for example, in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, one of the insights we unlocked, that intra-Africa trade could unlock about $180 billion in terms of export revenue if we just harmonized systems and streamlined logistics. So there were incredible insights that we got out of it, but I think one of the most powerful things on reflection was that this will take collaboration, it will take inclusivity, it will take business, government, and civil society coming together in order to unlock the issue around food security. And most importantly, a reframe of how we think about farmers, who produce 70% of the continent's food is actually by smallholder farmers. How we start thinking about inclusivity and recognizing that agriculture is not a sunset industry, but actually will be a driver and engine of growth for Africa and the continent at wide.
100%. Key priorities that do need to be unlocked and ensure that we act on in the meantime. I am cognizant of time as well as some pressures that might be at hand. So I do want us to ensure that, as you've all mentioned, it's been robust conversations, some sleepless nights from what we understand, many voices that have been added to the table, and most importantly, this is where the hard work actually commences. It's not just reading through commentary, it's actually implementing and doing our best to lobby for the implementation of these particular recommendations. There are various stakeholders who are actively participating here today. Some within policy, others who are within the financing division, members of the media, the entrepreneurs, the women, the youth, the innovators and industrialists that we are speaking to. And I'm quite keen if each of you could share, just very briefly, across the continent, when we reflect on these recommendations, what are the key aspects that we should walk away with to understand that we too play a role in our own capacities to ensure that these recommendations can be implemented. Deborah, I'll start with you, and we'll make our way down the panel as we tie this into your concluding remarks.
Yeah, for us as a task force, what we recognized is to get behind and address the issue around food security, urgency is key. This is not something that we can wait for. By 2030, we will inject another 300 million Africans onto the continent, net population increase. So it will take government, it will take business, it will take civil society to come in and act on the pressing issue around food security. Otherwise, hunger will deepen, economic shocks will continue, climate shocks will continue, but we'll take the tripartite to come in and address the issue around food security. Urgency is key. The currency of now is implementation. Getting moving from paper to pavement, policy to actions. Farmers want reality and not just promises on paper.
Yep.
The time to act is now.
100%. Daniel, I can imagine you echo the sentiments, maybe including
Very
modernization
much so.
and expansion.
I would just add a footnote, certainly from where we sit when it comes to sort of energy mix and just transitions, the key issue is finance, is mobilizing finance at scale, at the right price, on the right terms, and that can only happen if we strengthen public-private sector collaboration. We need the public sector to enact the right policy frameworks, give policy certainty to avoid the issues that we're seeing around permitting delays and delivery systems. And with that conducive base being set, the private sector is then able to come with technology, with skills, and with relevant finance. So it's very, very key that as we go away here, we must strengthen all those structures that support public-private sector cooperation.
100%. Mambusi?
I liked the fact that the PMO focused our minds through one simple filter. Are your proposals and recommendations relevant for business? Are they implementable? Are they scalable? And I hope that everybody in this room find the recommendations from our task force relevant.
100%. Andrew, we close it off with you.
I think we had the same feeling that the government-private collaboration was going to be absolutely key, but one of our findings was that often that collaboration in developing industrialization strategies does happen, but what doesn't happen is establishing capacity to implement, monitor, implement, track, adapt very quickly to a changing environment. The world is changing quickly, and that mechanism is really important. And the second one that I think has come out quite strongly is how we intentionally drive adoption of new technology, sustainable, green manufacturing. It's not going to happen on its own unless there's an intentional approach, demonstration platforms, blended finance, mechanisms that can really accelerate our adoption of new technology.
100%. Time is of the essence, and we need to make sure that we capitalize on it quickly. So to our panelists, thank you so much, as well as task force chairs. There will be more robust conversations, and in-depth analysis of the recommendations that have been made. But thank you for giving us a quick overview of some of the insight that you've put together with the vast array of industry experts as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our task force chairs a round of applause as they make their way off of the stage. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. one half of the bomb squad, if I can refer to them as such, right? Contributing to the recommendations. And more than anything, some of the key takeaways that have been highlighted by the initial panel discussion that we've had will continue to be echoed with the next level of chairs that we have, task force chairs who will be joining us. Again, building up on how it is that we implement, measure, scale, and of course ensure that the necessary resources are also allocated to unlock this potential that we'd like to uncover. Another quickfire panel discussion as well, ladies and gentlemen, again with industry peers and counterparts that many of you are familiar with, and some of you might have even contributed as well to the ongoing engagements that they too have participated in. Allow me once more to welcome our speakers up on stage. The chairs will join me on stage, sitting in the second seat to my left-hand side. Following my introduction of all of my panelists and participants, we'll then ensure that we give them a warm round of applause for all of them that are present. And perhaps we can just shift gears slightly. True to African culture, some ululating, maybe whistles. Vuvuzelas, I'm told, were not allowed in the building. However, if you have a spare one, perhaps we can acknowledge this, the celebration that we should have in terms of this momentous part of our journey. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Shadi Chauke, Deputy Chair for the B20 South Africa Employment and Education Task Force, followed by Phuthi Mahanyele Dabengwa, Chair for the B20 South Africa Digital Transformation Task Force, Ruweda Redfern, Chair of the B20 South Africa Integrity and Compliance Task Force, and Mr. Sim Shabalala, Chair of the B20 South Africa Finance and Infrastructure Task Force. A warm round of applause for each of them, please, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. That's more like it. That's how we actually lead as African leaders across the continent and globally, with a strong element of energy. Perhaps I'd like to start off this conversation with yourself, Sim, given that you are a rose amongst many other roses on this panel. So really illustrative of the fact that gender parity is taken seriously. Divergent voices and views and diversity and inclusion has been a priority for the B20 itself. And maybe let's pick up with yourself, Sim. Have you been getting enough sleep, as your colleagues and counterparts have shared?
Yes, Gugu.
Despite the ongoing engagements.
Because finance and infrastructure are so boring.
Far from it. But I think a valid point for us to start off on, given that it has been echoed by the previous panel and task force chairs, that when it comes to finance and of course infrastructure, these are key aspects to really mobilizing so much more of the ancillary aspects of economic growth right across the spectrum. Let's start off with the journey and your reflection so far on the engagements you've had regarding your respective task force and just how robust those engagements have been.
Yeah, Gugu, the fundamental proposition is that the world is short roughly $3 trillion need $3 trillion per annum on financing for critical infrastructure. The continent is 170 per annum, but we are only able to raise 85 billion, whereas we need 170 a year. And that's a huge challenge. So that's what the job is about. The privilege of being involved in the entire process manifests in many different ways. The first one was that the launch event in Cape Town, organized by the B20, was one for the history books. It was simpler, better, faster.
We see what you've done there.
It was magnificent. It was well organized. It started on time, finished on time. The content was fantastic. When we arrived in Cape Town on the Sunday, the airport was alive with Xhosa accents, German accents, English, Australians. The event itself, the following day, was fantastic, as I say, and that really set the tone for the balance of the event. So one had the experience of dealing with major issues, serious issues led by South Africa with an African perspective and with an emerging markets perspective. If I just mention this, just thinking about the people that were involved, we heard some bragging by our co-chairs, by our fellow chairs of the task forces. Ours was a smaller one. We had 170 task force members. but also from throughout the world. The largest component was from South Africa. The second was from the United States. We had Chinese, we had Zimbabweans, we had Nigerians, and so forth. Our co-chairs were from the United States. JP Morgan, Daniel Pinto was the vice chair of JP Morgan, was one of them. Somela Zubaru, the CEO of Africa Finance Corporation, was one of our co-chairs. So that gives you a sense of the quality of people that were present, and we all reached consensus. 10,000 words of beauty.
I've never heard anyone describe numbers like that before, but I think it really does make sense. And perhaps just to stick with you for a moment, as you've mentioned, global voices and a variety of thoughts, views, perspectives, and research that was brought to the table. And I think this also underscores how perhaps we need to read the recommendations when it comes to looking at alternative sources of funding and financing options. Maybe talk us through that, if that's also been a key consideration to ensure that to meet the needs of infrastructure and effective infrastructure rollout that's resilient, sustainable, and of course quick to implement, that we do need to ensure that there were robust outcomes regarding the recommendations on funding options.
Absolutely. Our knowledge partner was Deloitte, and they did a fantastic job. Our network partners were Oliver Wyman and the International Institute of Finance. We reached 3 recommendations. The first one was we need to identify critical infrastructure and unblock the blockages that make it difficult to finance that critical infrastructure, whether it be roads, bridges, ports, data centers, electricity grids, and so forth. The second one was what impediments are there to raising the finance necessary to build that infrastructure, including without limitation changing the Basel rules as is appropriate, changing procurement rules in countries, changing the way in which development finance institutions allocate their capital based on their mandates. And then thirdly, get the funds into the economy and into the hands of SMEs. By way of example, having IT platforms and rules that make it possible to pay them on the due date of payment rather than 180 days later.
Yeah. 100% driving that sustainability and that growth and cash flow of businesses as well. Roida, I'm kind of keen to come to you and get your perspective on this one, given that you've taken care of the Integrity and Compliance Task Force, and a very important one, not just for the continent at large, but for the world over, where we know that integrity and good governance sits at the center of thriving economies as well as societies. I'm quite keen, just to share your overview on the reflection of the journey and the robust engagements you've had to participate in.
I think some reflection is that very early on, all task force members agreed on, the concerns around corruption, and we all know that corruption costs. Myths that we have to quickly debunk is that corruption is a South Africa issue. Corruption is an Africa issue. We know that corruption is a global issue. We also know that corruption is not a public sector issue. It is a public and private sector issue. And so I think that, the task force very quickly rallied around the problem statement. We had over 110 task force members, also very privileged to have representation from across the various continents, representation from multinationals, as well as SMMEs, entrepreneurs. Gender parity as well was quite important to us. And what this meant, this diversity of thought, this multinational SMMEs, entrepreneurs, brought this very diverse thinking, and what we came up with was actionable items, actionable and implementable recommendations that cut across size of industry, sectors, size of businesses. And so I'm quite proud of that fact. And we all understand that corruption, the cost of corruption includes the fact that, it deters investment, it stifles inclusive growth. And so, we can do a whole bunch of things that the task forces have been involved in, but unless we get the foundation right, unless we have good governance in public sector, private sector, across the globe, we are not going to see that inclusive growth that we need, not just as a country, but as a continent. And so we really rallied around that problem statement. I think that where we sit is we have a real opportunity with the pace of technology to utilize technology to deal with the systemic issue that we have called corruption. And so, we've made recommendations around the use of technology to do that. And I think, finally, what I would like to say is that this is about collective action.
Yeah.
And in our paper, our policy paper, we have a number of case studies, but really there's something in there that every single one of us sitting here in this room can go back to our various businesses, our organizations, and say, I can implement this. I need to push this with my board. I need to have this discussion at executive level. And that's what we were really trying to achieve. We were supported by an incredible knowledge partner. And I think, perhaps my final reflection is, Cass talked about the unity. This was, the B20 was not just a platform, for the voice of business. It also had the downstream impact of, I think, bringing business together. So on a day-to-day basis, we compete with our knowledge partners, right? And a number of the chairs compete in the market on a day-to-day basis, but we all came together for the greater good. We all came together for the purpose of inclusive growth, which is something that was remarkable to see. And it really has been a privilege to be part of it.
Yeah, I find it exciting, of course, that many of you have come together to share much more of these outcomes. And not only has technology been an enabler to facilitate collaboration, but it also democratizes access to resources, to information, to tools, to partnership and strategy. And Phuthi, this is directly up your alley, given the task force that you chair. And I'm quite keen to understand, as you share your reflections, what has been one of the key standouts regarding the golden thread of technology and, of course, digital adoption and innovation to actively drive some of the outcomes of the recommendations that you've shared?
So I would say it's really humanity. I saw humanity through our co-chairs. So we had, and one of our co-chairs, Shamil Jusuf, is here with us, the group CEO of Vodacom. We had, co-chairs who represented the largest telcos globally, as well as, tech firms globally. So we had Vodacom, we had Microsoft, we had Google, we had I had people who are knights, people who are sirs, people who are Her Excellency,
So it's not about the number, but I guess the caliber this time.
Yeah.
The quality, as was mentioned.
But I speak about the humanity because despite the great work and the great people that they are, the humility that they showed throughout the process. So we had a task force made up of 220 members and some very vocal young people who would just, speak their minds.
Yeah.
But our co-chairs were very understanding, very humble, and engaged with them, throughout some very difficult conversations. So, we started out with 3 recommendations, but ended up with 4 recommendations, thankfully. But it took a process to be able to get to those 4 recommendations for everyone to be in agreement. It was a real process of engagement, of interrogation, and I'm very thankful to the knowledge partner that we had in Bain, led by Natalie Naidu, who did a phenomenal job in just ensuring that we had that continuous consistency and engagement, meaningful engagement, without anyone feeling, disrespected or under-regarded in any way.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm quite keen also to get your thoughts on the recommendations regarding digital literacy right across the spectrum, right, to make sure that there's an alignment, whether we're talking financing of deals or even going back to the upskilling and development of our skills force and the demographic dividend that we have. Talk us through some of those themes, ensuring that digital literacy is prioritized right across the spectrum as a key recommendation from some of your partners.
Yeah, so digital literacy was a key one from a Global South perspective, given that we were the last Global South country to be hosting the B20. And so, it was an important one, and one that I hope will continue as it moves on. So we had digital literacy, and one of the things that was important for us was what would happen beyond our hosting of the B20. And so there's a number of projects that a number of our organizations are involved in ensuring that we have this continuous digital literacy. It's an important area because when we look at AI, we know that, you know, the global north is streams ahead of us.
Yep.
And so if we are to get the rest of the globe, and many of the global south countries such as India and China are also way ahead. But if we, and particularly South Africa, and with the emphasis on the rest of the African continent, if we as Africa are to really move along with that, we need to ensure that we're getting as many of our young people in, you know, as possible to ensure that they have access to digital skilling. And so we've pushed for that, and we've also looked at obviously AI ethics, and also connectivity, and also DPR, which is digital public infrastructure. But it's been an important component, one that I hope will continue as we hand over to the USA.
100%. We're excited to see this being adopted, and of course the robust conversations that will continue to take place. Shadi, I've kept you quiet for too long, but as you can tell, there's an interlink between these conversations. And I mentioned digital literacy because we are well aware that upskilling and of course education remains a critical avenue to make sure that growth right across the world can be unlocked. I'm quite keen to hear not only outcomes from some of the recommendations that have been shared, but just the nature of engagement that has taken place with many of your peers and counterparts within this task force.
Thanks, Gugu. I mean, lots of intersections with the other task forces. Can I just say, for me personally, I'm one of those people who has heard and has seen the gathering of G20s over the years, but it really made a difference to be privileged enough to be a part of the actual discourse this year. It's one thing to see and read about it, but to be a part of the discussions and to form part of this melting pot really of people from various parts of the world coming together to discuss solutions that we can come up with to address specifically employment as well as education. For me, that was such an incredible privilege.
100%. And I think what you're highlighting is an important takeaway, right, which we will get into in a moment. But again, just reflecting on some of the outcomes of the recommendations. As we've heard, we need to ensure that we evolve in terms of the sustainability of education and employment, prioritizing growth, and of course, entrepreneurs and women within this ecosystem. How is that filtered through into some of the recommendations?
So, I mean, we had several key themes. We were very much involved in identifying, solutions for addressing specifically youth unemployment. We cited a case study that is happening right here in South Africa around the National Pathway Management Network, which is really a digital network that brings together live, data around job seekers. There's over 4.5 million users or job seekers on that particular platform, and these young people are able to be matched, to job opportunities. We cited that as a case study that really should be adopted by other G20 countries, so that it is important that as the G20 or as G20 countries, it's important that we very much are we have visibility around, the extent of youth unemployment, especially around all the G20 countries. We also were very much concerned about increasing participation of women, because we all understand that women participation in the labor force is actually going to increase GDP, and we were also around, ensuring that we have to make sure that there is targets. Yes. It's one thing to discuss solutions, etc., but it's good to have targets that we need to set. So one of our recommendations was saying that we need to increase the participation of women and basically reduce that gender participation gap by 30% by 2030. So targets were very important. because it's important that at least those things will be measured and we can track progress.
Sure.
So that's what
100%. Well, with much more time for us to actually engage into some of those outcomes and of course the recommendations that have also been made. But I do want to tie this into the closing remarks that you'll share with us, again, because we are under pressure for time. But Shadi, you touched on something so important, that for many of us as South Africans, as Africans, as participants, as global peers, we typically have an outsider's view of the G20 and the B20 as a subset. But to actively participate means that we are all key participants and all will see the consequence and the outcomes of these conversations. For the many stakeholders who are not only actively engaging and watching here today, perhaps share your reflections as a South African. I'll go right across the spectrum as to why this moment matters, not just for South Africa, not just for B20, but for the continent at large.
I mean, it is so important to not be a spectator when it comes to these issues. And for me, the impact that this participation has had on me is it has actually encouraged me to be an active, participant in coming up with solutions. It was great that we were able to illuminate issues that are facing our country as well as the continent, and be invited to the discussions where South Africa as well as the continent's issues are illuminated, and it's not just looking at Western perspectives. So it was great to be able to bring in that voice to illuminate our challenges as a continent, and making sure that we can also represent Africa as well as South Africa's voice in those discussions.
100%. Puti?
I think when our Sherpa, Cas Kovadia, opened, he spoke about us being able to move our people from, and particularly on the African continent, into a demographic dividend. And so if we are to do that, we need to ensure that our young people, and even us, have access to digital literacy, and ensure that we are familiar with AI in our businesses so that we can move our businesses forward. And so these things are important if we are to make a difference in our organizations, and as well as our continent as well.
100%. Rueda, your thoughts?
I think that for me, this B20 means that South Africa, we were not just sitting marginalized at the sidelines. We were driving policy changes. We were actively involved, in driving inclusive growth across the African continent, and that is what was so special. I think that I'll be glad to spend more time in my day job post-November, but certainly over the next 2 months, we are deeply involved in the advocacy phase. Yeah. But having spent these months invested in our policy papers, I'm now emotionally attached. Right? So for me, this is about what happens beyond November.
Yeah.
And how do we drive what we've done beyond November for the benefit of all Africans.
100%. Sim, your parting shot?
Gugu, the famous author Pliny the Elder, in around AD 80, said, "Ex Africa semper aliquid novi." Something interesting always comes out of Africa, and our recommendations are going to be the most interesting in the last 2 decades. Firstly, and then secondly,
yep, let's acknowledge that.
And most importantly, Puti made this point very well, that this is about humanity. It's about humanity globally, but it's about our parents who need to buy homes, buy fridges, buy cars, and the cost that it costs them to get those cars, which has a lot to do with the cost of capital for the sovereigns, the South African sovereign, and us making a difference in the conversations around reducing that cost. It's 100%. About those homes, those fridges, and those trucks that our people need to cart the cement for our infrastructure. It's a very human thing to do. Thank you.
100%. Thank you so much to all our panelists for giving us some feedback and insight and highlighting the key consequences we need to be mindful of. Thank you so much as they make their way off stage. I think, as you can tell, we've tried to follow up quite quickly on some of the changes and developments that do need to take place. And of course, following through with some of the announcements, especially following up on the conversations so far today. There's a lot of information that we're going to absorb. Of course, the chairs have given us their feedback and their insight, and these conversations will continue to evolve. They will be implemented. We will also be able to peel back at the many layers as to how many of these recommendations were also brought forward. As you can tell, the program is shifting, and we want to ensure that we get through all the necessary speakers to boldly witness this particular handover of the recommendations that will be shared here today. If anything that all the chairs have highlighted is that, yes, it takes 8 different task forces to make sure that you and I, as individuals in our human capacity, thrive. Because when you do well through the access to education and upskilling in your technology and digital access, when you do well through getting access to education that also translates into the funding and the financing that influences your livelihood when it comes to infrastructure, the opportunities to transcend borders and tap into new networks right across the continent and even the globe, that is when we can really unlock so much more potential for all of us as economies as well as societies. So thank you again to the chairs for giving us their feedback. We appreciate it. We know that we just touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of the effort and the work and the conversations that have been held, but we do look forward to actually receiving and seeing and reading more of the details that will be shared. So thank you again for your time. They will also be available for ongoing engagements and conversations between many of you as peers. Well, I'm told that moment has arrived, right, where will be waiting for that official handover to take place, and the necessary representatives will make their way into the room. The minister is present, and he will join us in order to receive the handover of those recommendations. But as you can imagine, that bomb squad has put in a lot of effort and work. It hasn't worked in isolation, though. The B20 Sherpa, Kaz Kuvadia, together with the co-chair of the B20 South Africa, have actively worked to make sure that there's an element of alignment in the outcomes, in the recommendations, and how it is that these are shared to all of us as key counterparts. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hear from the co-chair of the B20 South Africa, who'll give us some feedback on these outcomes, and from there, actively welcome and participate in handing over these recommendations to the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, who will join us shortly in the room. As you can imagine, lots of moving parts and logistics, but if this was live TV, we might have gone to an ad break just to make sure that the minister can make his way in. However, you'll appreciate that we're working with live dynamics. So I will ask that when the minister does make his way in, that we do acknowledge him stepping in, and the co-chair will assist us with that. But on that note, keeping to real life and real time and the solutions that need to be implemented, ladies and gentlemen, please help me warmly welcome to the front of the stage, co-chair of B20 South Africa, Ubabamxolisi Mkojo, to give us some insights.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's very unfortunate that the first words that come out of my mouth in this little talk is to say Minister Ronald Lamola. I really do hope that if it was possible, if he's in the building, that we can just spend just these 2 minutes to allow him, because this is as much about him being present when this part of the presentation happens. Otherwise, it has no meaning and context for him if we just go into that. Can we just take please don't go away, okay? Because I'm not going to say go away because you will not come back on time. So if you could just allow 2 minutes. Is he?
He's here. We've got the thumbs up.
All right.
There we go.
Yeah, let's just allow him to settle himself. I can see him coming through right there, and then we may proceed. Thank you. Thank you very much. We may proceed now. Thank you for the ad break. Minister Ronald Lamola, I had to wait for me to start because your name is the first name that comes up. So it felt very odd just to talk to an empty chair. So, sir, thank you very much for gracing us with your presence. Minister Ronald Lamola, senior officials from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, representatives of the G20 presidency, esteemed G20 and B20 delegates, distinguished guests, business leaders, friends across the globe. Today really marks a profound milestone, not only for B20 South Africa, but for the continent we represent. We entrust to the G20 presidency a publication that carries the weight of over 1,000 voices and the hopes of billions. I want to reemphasize that, the hope of billions. These 30 recommendations are not just policy proposals. They are purpose. They reflect the grit, the ingenuity, and ambition of Africa's private sector. They speak to our shared belief that inclusive growth is not a slogan, but a strategy. And they affirm that Africa's moment is not on the horizon, it is here right now. As you may have heard today, we have laid out 5 strategic themes and 3 enabling pillars. And together they form a blueprint for the transformation from financing infrastructure to securing food system, from climate resilience to digital inclusion, and from raw mineral extraction to industrialization. These are not theoretical ideals. They are actionable, bankable, and urgent. But let me be clear, today's handover is not the finish line. It is the starting gun. From this moment forward, our task shifts from drafting to driving. Advocacy begins in earnest. We must now engage, persuade, and mobilize governments, investors, institutions, and communities. We must ensure these recommendations do not sit on shelves, but shape boardrooms, budget tables, and bilateral agreements. Africa's private sector stands ready. And we are not asking for charity. That is not what we are asking for here. We are inviting partnerships. We are not waiting for permission from anybody, but we are offering leadership. Minister, as you receive this publication, you carry with it the aspirations of the continent determined to rise. And to our global partners, we invite you to walk with us, invest with us, and build with us. And so let me close with the words echoed by our shepherd earlier on. Alone we race, together we blaze new trails. So let us blaze those trails with courage, with conviction, and with the clarity that this is Africa's time. And as he prepares to deliver his keynote address, I do have the privilege to invite the Minister, the Honorable Minister Ronald Lamola, to join me here on stage to formally receive the B20 South Africa Final Recommendations on behalf of the G20 presidency. There's a lot of heavy words here. It looks like paper, but the hopes of Africa rest right here. And it is indeed my privilege and my honor to hand it over to you, because we have the hope and the confidence that as the G20 presidency, you will take this with the resolve, the urgency, and the determination that it deserves to ensure that we do have a prosperous Africa for the benefit of the generations to come. So I hope you are strong, because this is heavy stuff we're talking about here. The work begins, not now. The real work begins after November, when we have to engage with each other, when we have to collaborate with each other, when we have to put all of this into action, so that in the years to come, we can truly say that this B20 Africa, not just South Africa, Africa delivered the tomorrow that we all hope for. I hand it over to you, sir.
I thought I was done with carrying heavy books at the law school. But thank you for that handover. G20 Sherpa from the Department of International Relations, represented by Mr. Mguni here today, and the B20 Sherpa, Mr. Kaskavodia, on behalf of all the businesses that have participated in this platform, and all captains of industry who are here across the globe, and all the B20 participants. It is a great honor for me to be with you today to represent the President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, to welcome and receive the B20 report. This report is coming very timely because it's 2 months in advance prior to the Leaders Summit. So we will have to ensure that its content are factored in. We will not have an excuse of a late report. Business and the private sector in particular has a key role to play in the global economy. And the recommendations that you have made will be very critical to catapult the global economy into new heights. Our G20 presidency is a capstone of the Global South. It's uniquely positioned to shift the world axis towards a systematic, cohesive global economic cooperation. The data tells a powerful story. By 2050, more than 1 in 4 people on this planet will be on the African continent. This is a profound demographic shift, and it follows that the bulk of the investment in human capital and future skills must be focused right here on this continent. Equally, the demand for critical minerals, essentially to decarbonize our economies and reach net zero emissions by 2050, will be staggering. It is estimated that this transition will require 3 billion tons of minerals and metals to deploy solar, wind, and geothermal energy. We know, for example, that the Democratic Republic of Congo alone supplies roughly 70% of the world's cobalt, a mineral vital for electric vehicles' batteries. It is also against this background that South Africa, in all its participation in multilateral forums, emphasized the issue of value addition for our critical minerals, either at FOCAC, TICAD recently, and also our last engagements in the summit with the European Union. This points to a crucial area of convergence between the policies we are pursuing in the G20 and the recommendations of the B20. Our continent, and indeed the world, can no longer afford to be bound by extractive supply chains and industrial strategies of the past. The beneficiation and value addition of critical minerals must be a cornerstone of a more sustainable and inclusive economic growth model. And there is no better way for it to become a reality, particularly when there is a buy-in of business, because you are on the cutting edge of implementation. This is why one of the central messages of the B20 South Africa process has been that we cannot remain only a supplier of raw materials. We must invest in beneficiation, localization, and technology transfer, so that value is created on our shores, jobs are created for our people, and resilience is built into our economies. This is not just charity, as the chair was saying, it is a smart move in economics. It is essential for our continent not to be left behind in this phase of a drive for critical raw materials. It is the only way to build stable, resilient supply chains for the world of tomorrow. This also dovetails with our non-alignment approach as a country in our pursuit of our national interest. In a world where unilateral tariffs are being enforced, diversification of trade and new partnerships are necessary, especially in our context where job creations and inequality affect a significant majority of our citizens. Self-sufficiency and building your own reliance is the only way to ensure that you will still play a critical role in the economy of the future. Furthermore, as digital technology evolves, it is clear that Africa can no longer be a passive taker of technology. We must be at the center of the debates around digital sovereignty and the evolution of artificial intelligence. The B20 Task Force on Digital Transformation has spoken with one voice. The world must commit to narrowing the digital divide, expanding affordable connectivity, and creating a truly inclusive digital economy. When 1 billion Africans are excluded from the digital future, then the whole world loses. And who is better placed to help us achieve this goal other than yourself, who have created technologies in the vast of your businesses, interconnecting communities and societies, delivering food, medication, and making the lives of our people possible. You are speaking with experience and not just theory. Equally, the Employment and the Education Task Force has highlighted that skills development must be aligned with the jobs of tomorrow, green jobs, digital jobs, and entrepreneurial opportunities for our youth. We need education systems that prepare our young people not just to participate, but to lead. The future workforce will not be measured by role learning, but by creativity, adaptability, and innovation. Africa's youth are ready for this future if the world partners with us to unlock it. The B20 recommendations lay a strong foundation for the G20 to cohere around Africa's reindustrialization in a way that benefits not only the global community, but also future generations on the African continent itself. The Energy Mix and Just Transition Task Force has underlined the urgency of mobilizing finance at a scale for renewable and grid infrastructure. The Finance and Infrastructure Task Force has emphasized the empowerment of SMEs, the true job creators of our economies, through access to finance and integration into the global value chains. These recommendations shows that can and should lead the world in energy, agriculture, digital innovation, and industrialization. These are not just African priorities, they are global imperatives. The Sustainable Food System Task Force has reminded us that food security is not a regional challenge, it is a global imperative. With Africa's vast arable land and innovation in sustainable agriculture, the continent can be a breadbasket for the world. And as climate shocks multiply, Africa's ability to feed itself and others is not only an economic issue, it is a moral one. The global landscape is shifting. All certainties are giving way to new realities. We are witnessing a diversification of power where traditional partnerships are no longer the only axis of progress. This is our moment to rise to the occasion. This is our moment to rise to the occasion with confidence, clarity, and courage. It is a moment to prove that the Global South is not a problem, but is able to add to solving challenges that the globe is facing. South Africa's G20 presidency has entered its last 90 days. Approximately 87 of the 132 official meetings on the G20 calendar have already taken place. These meetings address some of the most urgent and significant challenges facing the global community, demonstrating our firm commitment to finding sustainable and innovative solutions through dialogue, collaboration, and cooperation. The ongoing G20 discussions aims to advance South Africa's overarching priorities, namely strengthening disaster resilience and response, ensuring debt sustainability for low-income countries, mobilizing finance for just energy transition, harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. These priorities are not abstract. They echo the B20's clear calls for coordinated global action to reduce debt burdens that stifle development, for private capital to be unlocked in support of the energy transition, and for new partnerships between government, business, and civil society to thrive and to drive inclusive industrialization. The B20 has rightly reminded us that no transition will be possible without affordable finance, no resilient economies without SMEs, and no fair global system without addressing inequality. The third meeting of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors took place on the 17th and 18th July 2025 in Durban, in KwaZulu-Natal. The meeting's outcomes were agreed in a communique consented to by all members that centers on strategic microeconomic issues. To this end, the meeting delivered productive and constructive discussions on Africa, the global economic outlook and microeconomic stability, the international financial architecture, sustainable finance, global health infrastructure, tax, financial sector issues, and financial inclusion. Furthermore, on the 29th of August 2025, our G20 presidency launched the G20 Extraordinary Committee of Independent Experts on Global Wealth Inequality. The panel is being chaired by the Nobel Economics Prize laureate, Professor Joseph Stiglitz. This initiative seeks to heighten global attention on the cross-cutting of inequality while advancing South Africa's G20 agenda on SDG 10, which calls for action to reduce inequality within and amongst the countries. The Extraordinary Committee will emphasize the need for practical action on political courage and international solidarity to address growing disparities in income, wealth, and finance opportunities. It aligns closely with the B20's Integrity and Compliance Task Force, which has made it clear that transparency, anti-corruption, and good governance are not just ethical imperatives, they are growth imperatives. Fair, transparent systems are what unlock trust, investment, and opportunity. A corrupt system may enrich the few, but it impoverishes the many and robs the world of innovations and growth. The Extraordinary Committee will develop and publish the first ever official G20 paper on global inequality, with 4 key objectives, namely, stimulate global attention and debate on the growth in extreme wealth and income inequality that exists across and within and between countries. Call for the formation between government and civil society of new strategic alliances against inequality. Provide credible analysis on the state of wealth and income inequality, including but not limited to its impact on poverty, multilateralism, and growth, and recommend and mainstream evidence-based solutions vital to reducing extreme economic inequality within, between, and across countries, which may include progressive taxation, a just transition, and multilateral and debt reform. I wish to express the President's gratitude to our host, Business Unity South Africa, and to Mr. Cas Cavadia, the G20 Sherpa, but also to all businesses that have supported South Africa's G20, not only the B20. All our meetings of the G20 across the board will not have been successful without the support of South African business and other businesses across the globe. My thanks also goes to the task force leaders. I'm not going to mention their names because I may miss someone and I might be in trouble. The dedicated teams and the sponsors who believed in the transformative power of an African-led B20. The success of B20 South Africa is more than just an achievement. It is a testament to what collaboration, commitment, and shared purpose can accomplish. History will not remember the communiques that we have signed or the documents that you handed over to me. It will remember whether we rose to meet the agency of this communique in terms of implementation. Will it be felt in the streets of Mogadishu, in the streets of Addis Ababa, in the streets of Soweto, or in Washington, in New York, or in Hong Kong, or in any part of the world? Will the world look different after we have implemented what is in the communique? That is what matters the most. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Lamola, for giving us your feedback and, of course, so boldly, courageously, and through clear avenues of collaboration, accepting the recommendations that have been compiled by the B20. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's been a momentous occasion so far today, but as has been echoed by several of the speakers, the chairs, of course, co-chair of the B20, the Sherpa of the B20, and the Minister himself, this is where the conversations need to be of consequence. We've deliberated, we've debated, we've evaluated, and now's the time to implement. So as we go about our ways throughout the different organizations, sectors, fields, and industries that we all lead so courageously, we do want to ask that you boldly take it upon yourselves to be co-collaborators in ensuring that the recommendations shared here today are of significance in the history of the globe. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for participating with us today. I do want to remind you, to our online audience and those of you who are present, you can get a copy of these recommendations on the B20 website. That is available on the website for you to go through, read, of course, and most importantly, implement within your respective spaces. To our key stakeholders who are here with us in the room, please do join us for refreshments which will be made available. My peers and counterparts within the media, please do reach out to the B20 office. They will be able to assist you with further interviews and deep dive into the conversations and recommendations made by the respective chairs of the B20. It will be a busy day for you today, but it's a busy day and next couple of weeks for many of us going forward as we head to November and ensure the sustainability of these outcomes in the years to come. Thank you kindly for your participation, your engagement, and of course, being clear participants in ensuring that we reconfigure the growth of the global community. On behalf of the B20, we wish you a successful and profitable day going forward, and most importantly, ongoing outcomes that speak to the recommendations that have been made today. Thank you so much for joining us. And a round of applause once again to all the key participants and the chairs who've joined us here today, ladies and gentlemen. As you join us for refreshments outside, a brief announcement to all the chairs from the B20 to make their way up on stage for a group photo with the co-chair, the B20 Sherpa, as well as the minister. So if you could please make your way up on stage. Please feel free to enjoy the refreshments that are available outside. Thank you again for your time.
Mm-hmm.